Blue Jays aren't investing a lot in him. And I think if we get the bounce back that he could have in 2023, we're going to.
Yes, sir, there she goes.
Hello and welcome to episode 246 of Section 138. I'm your host, Mark Colley, as always, joined by Bryson. Bryson, Happy New Year. First time recording in 2023. How are you?
Doing good, Mark. Welcome back for you as well. First episode of 2023. Should be an exciting year. The last time you were with us when we recorded, I remember opening up when I started talking about Carlos Correa and how he all of a sudden is a New York Met, and then all of a sudden it's still not official. And then now we're hearing he might go back to the Twins. So, I mean, that's the one thing that hasn't changed since we've last recorded is his sweepstakes, but it's just what a drama scene for him this offseason. Of course, the Jays make moves as well, which is why we're here today to talk about it. And it should be a fun one.
Yeah, the Correa stuff is wild. I mean, I've heard people saying that the Mets are just doing it for leverage to get the deal decreased. I've heard people speculating that the Mets were never intending to get the deal done and that Steve Cohen is just kind of doing it to play around and get some good image out of the Mets. And then, I don't know, it's a wild situation over in Queens. And who knows, maybe the Blue Jays swoop in and sign him on a 1 year, $35 million deal. And he comes out next offseason and tries to rebuild his image. I don't know what's going to happen with him, but certainly wild for him. The question I want to ask you to start off with is how long you think you can say Happy New Year after the new year until it becomes kind of weird. I think it's around like 2 weeks. So I think I can, especially since we haven't spoken face to face in 2023 yet, I think I can still say Happy New Year to you.
Yeah, that's completely fair. I think probably really around the 10 to 14 day window as well, maybe even a little bit before that. But again, it makes sense. We haven't recorded since the 22nd of December when you were with us. And then, of course, we recorded a couple days later. We still haven't even gotten your thoughts on the Dalton Varsho trade. So I guess you can give your thoughts on that as well at some point. But yeah, so I would say around 10 to 14 days. I think that's acceptable.
Okay, good. I'm glad. Yeah, we'll get to the Varsho stuff later in this episode, but we'll start off with Brandon Belt because that's obviously why we're talking today. And the Blue Jays signed him to a 1 year, $9.3 million deal last night. We learned of the deal first from Susan Slusler of the San Francisco Chronicle, later confirmed by a bunch of reporters. And then we got the $9.3 million figure from Shai Davidi of Sportsnet. The deal is expected to be announced today as we record this on Tuesday, January 10th. Apparently he's already completed his physical, which, as we've learned with Carlos Correa, is obviously a big part of the process. And especially for someone like Brandon Belt, who underwent surgery in September for his knee and has been plagued by injuries recently, that is a key cog in the process for someone like him. Just starting off, what are your thoughts on him? How do you, I guess the biggest question for me is how you see him fitting in with this team, because obviously, like, we see the Blue Jays go out and they spend $8 million on someone like Kevin Kiermaier, and they come out and say he's got the starting center fielder job. And then at the same time, they spend $9.3 million on Brandon Belt, and there's no way he gets a starting first baseman role, right? The Blue Jays have one of the best first basemen in the game in Vladimir Guerrero Jr., so it seems like right now he's going to be a bench piece. We know he plays some left field as well, so maybe he figures in the outfield a little bit, although the Blue Jays still have Whit Merrifield in the equation, so it's a little bit complicated to see the situation filling in there. But, bottom line, we know he's a left-handed bat. He has the potential to contribute offensively, even though he hasn't really done it over the last few years. So if he can stay healthy, if he can produce consistently, I think he'll be a valuable piece for the Blue Jays on the bench. But I don't think it's immediately clear his position with this team. Like, I think there's going to be some give and take in spring training and when the season starts to determine just how frequently he's playing.
Yeah, this is something where I think for majority of the offseason, we've kind of all teased this, and this is another name that the Jays go out and get that I don't think any of us really had on our radar. I mean, there's been lots of buzz, of course, of the remaining holes that the Jays need to fill in terms of like a fourth outfielder, maybe a fifth starter. And everyone has their own, I guess, player wish lists, and people talk about it all over social media, or if you just hear people talking about it in general. And I didn't think I saw one person named Brandon Belt come into this team. And I mean, in their fairness, this was something, again, that kind of just caught us kind of off guard. But then when you look at it, you can understand the fit that he has. And this really, truly could be a solid depth piece signing. And of course, we know Brandon Belt spent majority of his career, or pretty much all of his career, sorry, with the San Francisco Giants. And then for most of the part, he's been productive. Of course, he was part of a couple World Series teams on that team. And then all of a sudden in 2022, he deals with a lot of knee issues. He has a down season. And that was pretty much the sum of it last year, because of his numbers really dipped last year. And that's for what happened with the season. Again, he wasn't healthy. And he pretty much, I think he only appeared in about 78 games. I think that was the number I saw. So he's coming off knee surgery. He has to prove that he's healthy. That's number one. And of course, that's one of the main reasons, or the main factors that will be, or will determine if this is going to be a good fit or not, or if this will work out or not for the Jays because of that. So the one part we know about him so far, he's a lefty at bat. That's the one thing that, of course, everyone's, I guess, acceptable of it right now with this team, because of the lack of lefties that they had going into the offseason. Of course, they've addressed that so far with a couple of additions outside of it, with, of course, with Kiermaier and Varsho, and now you bring in another guy. But of course, the real question, like you said, Mark, is where does he fit in this lineup? Because of course you did mention the outfield part, where he has played outfield in the past. However, I believe it's been a couple years since he has been there. He hasn't been in the outfield since 2019. So I don't know necessarily how much we're going to rely on that. Of course, there's a possibility. I'm sure they've possibly hinted that, there might be a scenario or two, maybe not a lot throughout the year, but maybe a few times where we might be in a pinch and you might need to go in the outfield. He's done it before. And of course, with his knee issues, of course, he spent majority of his time the last couple of years at first base. And now coming over, or since the universal DH has become official, he can be a DH in this lineup at any point. But again, where does he fit in this lineup? And really, you look at it in a couple different scenarios, because of course you have the option now to DH him on days where Alejandro Kirk has to go behind the plate, because of course there's lots of times where it's the other way around, or maybe there's a rare occasion, or I wouldn't say rare, last year there's a lot of scenarios where Danny Jansen and Alejandro Kirk were in the lineup at the same time. But in days where Alejandro Kirk can catch, Brandon Belt can go in as a DH, and of course against righties he's going to most likely get a lot of at-bats as well, for that reason alone. And then of course for days where Vladimir Guerrero Jr. needs a day off from first base, he can go there as well. And really, outside of those two possibilities or two scenarios, there really isn't much other room that I see. But of course, if he understands what his role is to come over here off the bench, it is a solid bench piece. It's a solid depth position, and it just feels like this is another good example of somebody who knows how to hit off the bench, somebody who could be a really good option as well in the middle or later on in a game, even if he's not starting. So I really like the move because of that part. And it's just the different scenarios that you can have on this. Of course, we know Alejandro Kirk as well in the second half of the season last year. He slowed down a little bit, and a lot of people were wondering if that had any sort of fatigue factor, or if it was just something maybe beyond that. But if fatigue was a factor in that, you have to like the option of Brandon Belt being another possibility to help him in terms of a workload. And again, a guy that can DH, and he likely won't see a lot of reps against lefty pitching, of course, for that reason alone. And the other part too, and this comes with every lefty at bat in the major leagues, is that we all know the shift is going to be restricted in 2023. That's one thing that you can look at as well as a positive for somebody who basically for his entire career has probably been shifted on pretty much every single at bat. Now he gets to come over here as well in a hitter's friendly ballpark. Not as much of a shift to go against. And you really like this move for the Jays. But the main part, or the main factor and scenario with this, is if he's going to be able to be healthy in 2023. And he's going to have an opportunity to do so, getting $9.3 million over the course of the year.
Yeah, that's obviously the biggest question, because you look at the stats and he hasn't really had a full healthy season since 2019. I mean, yeah, like 2020, you can, I guess, throw that in there, 51 games, but I kind of write that off as, we don't really get a full sample size. It's 2 months of a season. You don't really get an indication of whether he'd be healthy over the course of the season. And then 2021, 97 games, 2022, only 78 games, of course, shortened by the knee injury, and then eventually surgery in September. So going back to 2019 is kind of the last full sample size we had, when he had 156 games. And, it was a good season by him. It was an OPS plus of 97. He batted a slash line of 234, 339, 403. And then he's also got some power in his bat. We know that he hit 17 home runs that year. And then going back to 2021, this is maybe the most impressive stat that a lot of people are relying on, is the fact that he hit 29 home runs in 97 games in 2021, which is just ridiculous. That's a absurd rate for especially someone who's 33 years old. And maybe, if he's playing that amount of games again, assuming he's healthy for 162, filling in off the bench, getting a start here and there, maybe he can recapture some of that power and offer that for the Blue Jays. So, but I think the workload is going to be the key component of this, not just in keeping him healthy, but also, like you mentioned, the flip side of it, like Vladimir Guerrero Jr. We saw when Vladdy wanted a day off, which again is rare, but sometimes he would get off his feet, go to DH. The alternative at first base was basically Cavan Biggio, and in a worst case scenario, Lourdes Gurriel Jr. And obviously, Gurriel is not going to happen now that he's been traded, but it was not a great situation. You're having two people who are not first basemen fill in at first base, and that was never going to be ideal for the Blue Jays. And now they have someone who is a first baseman who will be filling in at first base, and I think that makes them a lot deeper. So, yeah, it's a good deal. I mean, I don't see anyone criticizing this deal. The Blue Jays aren't investing a lot in him, and I think if we get the bounce back that he could have in 2023, we're going to have a really good season from him, and the Blue Jays are going to be a lot better because of it. So the Blue Jays have already been building out their depth this offseason anyway in other aspects of the team. You see the trades for Dalton Varsho and the acquisition of Kevin Kiermaier. That builds out the depth in the outfield with Whit Merrifield, and especially the defensive depth in the outfield. And then you look at other aspects of this team, the rotation and the bullpen with Chris Bassett and Eric Swanson. Both of those aspects of the team are a little bit deeper now than they were at the start of the offseason. I think there's still a lot of room to grow for the Blue Jays, especially in the bullpen. I think they have a lot of work that still needs to be done before the season starts for us to be confident in what they're bringing out of the bullpen, at least for me. I don't know where you stand on that, but I think the addition of Brandon Belt underlines the emphasis of this team to, I guess, not really improve the top line talent, but improve the depth this offseason. I like this deal, and I think the Blue Jays are doing a good job. Again, I don't think they're done. I think they need to keep adding in this bullpen, but I think Brandon Belt contributes to the Blue Jays' depth. I think he'll be a good piece in 2023.
Absolutely. And I agree with you in terms of the bullpen depth. And of course, the fifth starter stuff is still, we still don't really have a clear sense of that in terms of if that's something that they're really prioritizing to fill in terms of that. But I think another reliever, though, you can definitely see the opening for the chance that that is still in play here. And I do think that there's a really solid chance they can do that. I know they haven't done too much ever since obviously getting Eric Swanson. Of course, there was the recent Junior Fernandez claim that they got off waivers from the Yankees. A lot of people that like his upside on that, but it's, he was lost in the shuffle because the Yankees were only trying to make room on the 40-man roster. And then that's, of course, why the Blue Jays claimed him. So who knows if that's going to be another situation in terms of where he fits on the 40-man roster. That's one move they've made. And, of course, there's a couple other stuff that they can definitely revert to. And there's still some names available as well. So you see how they've improved offensively. And it really – and I go back to what you said at the end of the season, and you had the key phrase of diversifying the lineup. You really look at it now. And I guess I'll ask you, first of all, if you think they've done just that. And second of all, you can definitely see the change that there is, though, in this lineup in terms of what they've done, of course, not only getting these offensive pieces, but of course, also prioritizing defense. And the key, or the run prevention word from Russ Atkins that we made fun of the last time you were on, but it feels like it's a quieter off season for them in terms of names. But at the same time, and of course, this was before the Varsho trade especially, but at the same time, when they're making these moves, it really does feel like they're significant, and they could really pay off as really well for this team. And a lot of people believe that this lineup is a lot deeper than it was last season. And that's why, as much as last season was obviously a really good team who fell short in the playoffs, it does feel a little different in terms of what they've done this offseason. And it seems like it's heading in a good direction. And you got to feel good about where this lineup does stand as we're about a month away now from spring training starting, or at least pitchers and catchers report beginning. And of course, we know that the starting rotation with Chris Bassett was also addressed, getting one another starter that they needed. And of course, the fifth starter spot, once again, we don't know exactly where things stand. And then even on top of that, when you look at bringing in Brandon Belt, and then of course I mentioned the fact that he hasn't played in the outfield in a couple of years, there still is an opening for a fourth outfielder position. I know Jacob and I, the last time we spoke about the Varsho trade, saying, there may be one more outfielder and then they can kind of call it in terms of where they stand offensively and maybe revert to pitching. They bring in Brandon Belt, who is, again, a really good fit, but something that we weren't expecting. And at the same time, once again, there is an opening still potentially for a fourth outfielder position. And if that's not fulfilled, I'm not saying it has to be fulfilled. Whit Merrifield's obviously a really solid candidate to be involved in that. And then when you look at the infield now, with Brandon Belt coming over, it seems to be a little bit of a logjam between, again, Whit Merrifield, Santiago Espinal, and Kevin Biggio. So there might be some other cards here that still have to fall in terms of where this lineup definitely sits, and especially off the bench, because off the bench now, I don't know if you see the same thing as I do, but I'm seeing a little bit of a logjam between those three players. And there still is the question if they could go out and get another fourth outfielder. And then this fourth outfielder doesn't have to be a lefty anymore. I mean, they fulfilled what they had to do. This guy can easily be a right-handed hitter if they want. And I wonder if that's something that they're still going to go out and get. And at the same time, how do they plan on addressing it? It's not too much of an issue, but I just seem that, again, there's a little bit of a logjam with that. I was wondering if you see the same thing.
Yeah, I definitely think there is. I don't know if it's a huge problem for the Blue Jays, though. I think it's pretty easy to manage. Like, you look at the depth chart now, and it's, some of those guys that you were mentioning, Biggio, Espinal, Merrifield, and Otto Lopez are kind of the four guys that are, I guess, below what you would call starting level. I guess either Merrifield or Espinal are going to be at second base every day, and then I guess the way that I see it shaping up now is that you stick Espinal every day at second base. Merrifield is the fourth outfielder, whatever. Merrifield fills in at second when he's not starting the outfield, whatever it is. And then your bench, I guess, including Brandon Belt, is Biggio, Belt, and then Lopez, maybe. I don't know if there's going to be room for Lopez on the Major League roster. He's on it right now, but who knows whether that's going to stay. And of course, spring training is going to change all of this massively. But I don't know how much of a problem it is for the Blue Jays. Like, I don't know if I really see it as a problem.
Yeah, no, it definitely isn't. And it's a good problem to have, though, of course, if they do see it as one. So it just shows again how deep this lineup has truly gotten throughout the course of the offseason. And these have been moves that have been quiet leading up to the Dalton Varsho acquisition, where you really have a good feeling of where things currently stand. And then, of course, we know, again, shifting back to the bullpen, I think a recent name that we've seen, the last couple of days, but there hasn't been a lot of steam with it. Maybe a little bit more recently in the last few days is Alex Reyes. I don't know if you've seen the same thing, but of course he was a guy who missed all of last season, but there's high upside in terms of getting somebody like that. And apparently, there seems to be interest in that. I don't know if how likely it is or how true it is, but of course that's just one of many relievers that remain available out there. And of course that's something, again, where you feel like there's leeway for them to get possibly another guy before spring training begins, but definitely an interesting situation, or not a situation, but an interesting position the Jays find themselves in terms of where they do sit offensively.
Yeah, definitely. I want to talk about another reason why I like the Brandon Belt trade, and this is kind of a trend that we've seen the entire offseason. I guess this ties in with the Dalton Varsho trade as well. It's the impact on the clubhouse. And I never gave my thoughts on the Dalton Varsho trade, but I think the fact that they traded away both Teoscar Hernandez and Lourdes Gurriel Jr. in the same offseason, as well as hiring Don Mattingly, to me, it indicates that they are trying to change the makeup of the clubhouse at least a little bit, change the dynamics of how this team plays. And I mean, you saw it. The Blue Jays were a sloppy team. There's no other way to stay it. They're a sloppy team, or at least they were. You see the two culprits being Lourdes Gurriel Jr. and Teoscar Hernandez making mental mistakes on the base paths, or seemingly not sprinting out a ball in the gap in the outfield. And I was never one to take huge issue with it, but it is annoying to watch these mistakes happen. And I think trading those guys away is a big part of the equation. And then bringing Brandon Belt in, and then as well as Kevin Kiermaier in, two kind of older guys who have been there before and done it before at the major league level. Kevin Kiermaier being to the World Series with the Tampa Bay Rays in 2020, Brandon Belt winning the World Series with the San Francisco Giants in 2012 and 2014, and then making a couple of runs at it a couple other seasons. And of course, just being in the majors for 10 plus years since he made his debut in 2011. I think adding these guys represents a bigger trend for the Blue Jays this offseason, which is trying to build out the experience on the team, build out and change the culture in the clubhouse. And I like it. I like teams having fun. I don't think that's a thing about the Blue Jays that need to change. There's a lot of people out there who say, get rid of the home run jacket. It's stupid. Get rid of dumping sunflower seeds at the end of the dugout. It's stupid. Get rid of the barrio. Get rid of all that stuff. And I'm not a proponent of that. I think the fun stuff is great. I think the Red Sox shopping cart in the dugout is great. I think all these celebrations in the dugout, on the field, and the culture that baseball has become, fantastic. I'm not complaining about that. What I'm complaining about is what we saw in 2022. And part of the reason why Charlie Montoyo was fired was kind of that lack of accountability, that lack of responsibility in the clubhouse. And I think those two things are mutually exclusive. I think a lot of time fans want to say that they are the same thing, the celebrating, the having fun, and the accountability are the same thing. I think they're two different things. And I think the Blue Jays are addressing the accountability and responsibility in adding Kevin Kiermaier, in adding Don Mattingly to the coaching staff, and now adding Brandon Belt, because I think those guys have been there before. They've done it before. They know what it takes to be a successful team, and they've been at the majors for 10, 11 years in the case of Brandon Belt. And this is something I said when Charlie Montoyo was fired. I thought that that was the wrong move. I thought that, perhaps we can look back at it now and say that I was wrong to think that, but I thought that what they needed was a player who would provide that level of impact, that level of veteran, been there, done it before, know what they're doing, no crap. They're going to get it done. They're going to be out there every day doing their work. And Marcus Semien was kind of that side of things in 2021. They lost him and they were missing it in 2022, and they decided to address it by firing Montoyo. I think adding Brandon Belt, long story short, adding Brandon Belt makes it so that they get this sort of veteran impact that's been there, done there before, knows how to win at the highest level. They get that back in their clubhouse. So I think that's going to be a positive impact for the Blue Jays. I think that's probably the biggest positive impact of adding Brandon Belt, past the left-handed on the bench, past the, added guy at first base who can take away a bunch of work from Vladimir Guerrero Jr. I think the biggest impact Brandon Belt is going to have on this team is the fact that he's won a World Series before and he knows how to do it. And I think that's kind of what was missing with the Blue Jays last season.
I do wonder a couple things. Number one, if the home run jacket's going to be back, and number two, if Don Mattingly,
I doubt it. I don't think the jacket will be back.
Honestly, I'm with you on that one. And if it is back, what Don Mattingly would think about it. It's obviously we know the way he is. He's an old schooler, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's no way he would like that on his team if he was the manager, but of course he's not. But I really don't know about the home run jacket, but I'm in your shoes at this rate. I don't see it coming back either, of course, of the change that they've gone through. And it's interesting you bring this up because the last episode when it was Jacob and I mentioned that to Jacob at the end. I asked him the question along the lines is, do you see some sort of correlation here with who left, what came in, how they're changing it, Don Mattingly, everything like that, if it's a coincidence or if it's just the Jays simply improving their ball club? I think Jacob just said it was simply improving their ball club. I was kind of 50-50 on it. And the more I think about it now that we're a couple weeks after the trade is I do think there's something there. And I agree with what you're saying is I think as much as the team was likable, as much as a lot of people still are very upset with the trade with Lourdes Gurriel Jr. in particular, something had to change. And I'm fully along the lines of it. I understand the team can have fun. And of course, the sunflower seeds and all everything like that. But we saw how last season ended. We saw with what they had, it didn't work. And there was a lot of flaws that were exposed in those short 2 games against the Mariners. So coming into the offseason, I think it was this conversation that we had really early on, way after the loss, to possibly expect some changes. And I think maybe that kind of was a little bit more than what we were expecting from what we've seen this offseason. Because think about it. This is a contending team now who still have playoff expectations and still are a top team in the American League East. You usually don't see contenders like this do these types of moves in terms of moving two key pieces in your starting lineup, in your clubhouse, in terms of the culture and everything like that. Those are two guys that are gone, and that's Teoscar Hernandez, Lourdes Gurriel Jr. It's just it was a little bit more than what I was expecting, to be honest with you. I think we were all expecting at least one guy to go, and that was the one question you asked in terms of who's the Blue Jay that is most likely to be gone. And I'm pretty sure it was you and I recording that day. We both said Teoscar Hernandez. It just, if you were going to ask me, it was going to be Teoscar Hernandez and Lourdes Gurriel Jr., I would have called you crazy. I don't think I would have believed it for a second. But when you think about it now, you're bringing in Dalton Varsho, you're bringing in Brandon Belt, of course, who had the nickname of being the captain of the San Francisco Giants, who's been there before, who's done that before. The same thing with Don Mattingly, who's coming in, who's going to help John Schneider. Kevin Kiermaier is all business. We know the way he is. We've known him very well from his days with the Tampa Bay Rays. It is, and you can't deny the fact that this is a bit of a culture change. This is a bit of a message, I think, as well, that the front office is sending this team, and especially to the core players, that we need to get something done. Things need to change. We need to be better in the playoffs. We need to get to the playoffs. We need to be that team that people take seriously. And it just, unfortunately, it was looking good as the season ended last year. And then, of course, we know what happened in the short 2 games. But it just, to me, it definitely feels like a message as well that the front office did send to the players, again, for the core players. And it's truly going to be interesting of how this is all going to transpire in terms of what I mean in the dugout. I mean, we're going to see a little bit of it during spring training, but of course, not every game's televised, and you're not going to really have a lot of, I would say, dugout access, other than a pitcher coming out in the first inning and then doing a Sportsnet interview if the game's on a Saturday afternoon in Dunedin. But other than that, you're not really going to see much until really the regular season begins in April. And then I guess the behavior of the dugout, because again, we know how, I guess, the culture was in prior years. It's just something that for the first month of the season, for sure, it's going to be catching my eye in terms of how everyone's kind of behaving. And of course, the early signs early on, is this home run jacket going to be back? We likely know the sunflower seeds, that whole thing probably won't be back, because Teoscar Hernandez was the one who was doing that. The whole pirate celebration, I guess, after games, how different is this really going to look? And I do think that there is something there in terms of who left and who came in. And this has to be a little bit of a culture change, I think, as much as this team loves to have fun, as much as a lot of people do not like the move of sending away Lourdes Gurriel Jr. and Teoscar Hernandez. I think the better part in terms of having fun is winning games. And I think that's all that's going to matter, especially when the time comes where that's going to be a deciding factor late in the season.
Yeah, I think I was kind of like you. I was on the fence of whether, like, 50-50, was this because of the culture? Is this just a good deal? And Lourdes Gurriel Jr. is on the final year's contract, et cetera, et cetera. But then I think once you start to zoom out a little bit and see that, yeah, the Blue Jays fired their manager halfway through the season because of, quote unquote, not enough accountability in the clubhouse and people not happy with the way things were being handled and people making mistakes and not being held accountable for it. And once you consider that as well, I think it's concerted effort by the Blue Jays, and we'll see how it pans out. We entered this offseason talking about how we needed a big change, and the Blue Jays have kind of, I don't know if you want to use this word or not, but I'm going to use this word. It's been kind of a rebuild for the Blue Jays. It's been like a mid-competitive rebuild in terms of trading away 2 of, I guess you could call them faces of the franchise. Like, maybe not that level, but like, you talk to people who aren't, hardcore Blue Jay fans, and they probably, like, the people they mention are Vladimir Guerrero Jr., Bo Bichette, and then, maybe Alek Manoah is in that conversation now, but I think Teoscar Hernandez and Lourdes Gurriel Jr. are the 2 other guys who they mentioned. And so, I don't know. To me, it feels like kind of like it's a changing of the guard for the Blue Jays, and we'll see how it pans out, but I think it'll work for the better for them. All right, that's all I got. You got anything else you want to mention before we wrap it up?
I guess the only thing I'll ask you was earlier on, and now that we're kind of behind, I guess another addition, obviously, and of course the Varsho trade you finally got to somewhat share your thoughts on. Is this lineup diversified for you?
Yes, it is diversified, at least more than it was at the start of the season, because you have Varsho, who's going to be starting every day, and he's a lefty, and he, you know, has really good offensive numbers, really good power. And then you also have Brandon Belt, who's going to be coming off the bench as a lefty. Is it diversified enough? I think is a different question. I would still like to see them go out and get some speed. I don't know how realistic that is at this point in the offseason. And to be honest, no one's really valuing speed at this point in baseball. So I don't know how realistic it is or how much in line it is with current baseball trends, but I think that's something I'd like to see them do. They don't really have anyone. I guess, like, if you're talking about pinch running late in a game, at this point, it's probably Kevin Biggio who's coming off the bench and pinch running, and it works. I don't know. I'd like to see someone a little bit faster, someone with elite speed, but I know that's not totally realistic with the way baseball's played right now. But yeah, it definitely is more diversified than it was at the start of the offseason.
And I guess Kevin Kiermaier helps in terms of that, in terms of getting speed, like you were talking about. That's a start for sure. But I think I know what you mean more of course, somebody coming off the bench and all of that. So I think we're probably in line for a couple more episodes until spring training really gets going. So it's nice that we're into the new year now and we're getting closer to that point where we can somewhat build a routine again in terms of recording consistently and having spring training to talk about. As much as we'll get bored of that after probably a week, it'll be something, but we are getting closer to the season. You can definitely start to feel the excitement and us starting to crave baseball again. I know we've kind of talked about that, especially over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, it's definitely building a little bit. We've turned the corner. We're now closer to spring training than we are to the final day of the Blue Jays' unfortunate last season. And we are very much looking forward to, I guess it's like about a month from now, I guess a month and 5 days ish, that pitchers and catchers will be reporting in Dunedin, Florida. So we're looking forward to it. We'll be back hopefully soon with some more news or some more stuff to talk about. As always, you can support our podcast by finding us on social media. That's at Section 138 Pod. We're on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. You can always rate and review our episodes and our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen. Just help spread the word about what we're doing. So we'll be back next time we have something to talk about. As always, we'll catch you then.